new giant bill going to be voted on by Congress. We have another political killing down in the Capitol in D.C. And we also have some interesting news coming on the Epstein story that is, I would say, disheartening. We also have a new AI that's been released, and this one's a scary one, folks. We're going to talk about that and quite a bit more on today's show. I just want to welcome you to We The Patriots Podcast. I'm your host, Sal Assante. Today, we're going to try to have some fun. Let's get right into it.
This thing that's in my brain, it keeps me from wanting to go on, but I want some gain. Baby, a little fame.
One big, beautiful bill, as Trump is calling it, as the act is named. This is a doozy, folks. I can't make heads or tails on how I actually feel about it. There's some good, there's some bad. We're going to talk about it. We also have quite a bit of, I guess you could call it fun stuff. We got some pretty shitty things going on around the country, and I think we just need to be open, honest, and unafraid to talk about the nuances. As long as you're all with that, I hope you enjoyed the ride. We're going to have a fun show today on this big, beautiful bill, as I'm kind of going to start calling it the big, beautiful nightmare. First and foremost, I think it is imperative on our Congress, our government, everybody involved in making these laws. I believe it's absolutely imperative to eliminate the need for and the ability to push these massive, and when I mean massive, I mean the amount of text that goes into these bills. Now, I know there's a lot of legal jargon that needs to get included, but that being said, handing anybody a stack of papers 1,200 pages long and expecting them to vote on it properly within a matter of hours is ridiculous, to say the least. It doesn't make any logical sense. It does not follow any form of proper thinking, to me, that would make anyone want to vote on the bill. And yet we have half of the Congress saying yes, half of the Congress saying no, at this point, I should say. So let's talk about this bill. What is it? Well, this is a giant spending bill at the end of the day. Reforms some taxes. It continues some old. Basically, the first vote that went through the House passed not even on party lines. It had two dissenting Republicans, Thomas Massie and the other Republican to vote directly against was Warren Davidson of Ohio. There was also a few present votes with no vote, which I think is pretty soft. What the legislation included, well, it's a mouthful, more than a mouthful actually, but I think the key points to recognize are that it continues the tax cuts from 2017. It raises the child tax credit, which we're going to talk about in a second. It also gets the estate tax exemptions lifted quite a bit. It's proposing to eliminate tax on tips and overtime for anyone making an income less than $160,000. It raises SALT reduction taxes, which is state and local tax reductions. It also reduces Medicaid. It allocates a significant amount of money to Border Patrol, about $4 billion, and allows for the hiring of 10,000 new agents. It's also going to increase the excise tax on university endowments, which we will talk a little bit about in a minute. Now, let's talk about the broad implications of this bill. One of the biggest is that it does not cut spending whatsoever. It actually raises it. And this is a massive problem, and one that I can imagine is the reason that Thomas Massie himself voted against it. As we talked about in a previous episode, Thomas Massie went against extending Biden-level spending, and it seems like he's continuing that, and I don't blame him. If he's going to hold true to his values, it is pretty ridiculous as the quote-unquote conservative party to be raising the amount that we're spending continually without any stopper seemingly in sight. It raises the debt ceiling as well, so that's something to be, I would say, concerned about, as we are already nearing, 37 trillion dollars in debt as a nation, looking at going above 40 by the end of Trump's reign for sure. And there's a reason for that. You're going to be cutting these taxes and not holding true to how Trump was pushing those tariffs earlier in the year. The money needs to come from somewhere in order to fund this massive spending that we have as a nation. Now, you are not going to ever see a balanced budget. I shouldn't say ever, because I think at some point the chickens are going to come home to roost, so to speak. But you will not see for quite some time a balanced budget. You will not see, as a business is supposed to function, the income match the expenses. And I don't think that's ever going to happen. However, you would expect from, again, the conservative party, especially as they're supposed to be conservative on the economy, you would expect them to be a little bit better at managing money, or seeming like they are better at managing money. And again, we're seeing higher levels of spending than even Biden went through, than Trump went through in his first term. It is just a never ending streak, it seems, of spending as a nation. And it, in my opinion, I am no economist. In my opinion, it is not possible to continue. But we're going to continue it under Trump. I believe that's why Massey voted against it. Now, one thing that I definitely wanted to talk about was the tax on tips and overtime. So, how I feel about it personally is a little mixed. My biggest issue is that I'm really not a huge believer in an income tax in general. So, reducing any part of that or getting rid of taxes on overtime, tax on tips, that's great. You still leave a large chunk of income tax that is being had. My biggest issue with, and this is not me coming from a conservative angle, again, if anything, I would want to eliminate the entirety of income taxes, but eliminating taxes on overtime seems stupid, to say the least. The amount of people that work overtime in the country is not a small amount. I don't have exact figures in front of me, but just going off the fact that basically everybody I know that has a full-time job works overtime in order to meet their ends, it's a lot of people. And when you talk about what overtime usually means, it means time and a half pay. It means that the government has a larger amount of money that they're able to tax. And that means that that's a large pool of money that's coming in. That's a large portion of spending in general that's going to have to be funded off of the backs of Americans or printing money, which doesn't really make any sense fiscally. Just, I feel like I'm stating the obvious here. That seems ridiculous. No tax on tips, I think, is a little bit of a different animal. And the reason that I say that is I think a lot of people, and this is totally anecdotal, this is not something that I've found research on, but if I had to guess, I would think most tip workers that primarily get tips, which you're thinking about like servers in a restaurant, for example, I would think that they don't properly report their tips, especially if it's coming in cash. The reason that I say that is because those people have enough of a hard time making ends meet without paying taxes on that. So, what I think the no tax on tips for that portion of society, I realistically think it's just enabling what they're already doing. I do think that the more impactful part of that legislation is the tax on overtime. Now, again, I think that the biggest issue is that we're not cutting spending. And so, well, we could just look back on another former show. It seems like the Doge cuts, the suggested cuts, A, they've never been voted on. So nobody in Congress, nobody in the government for that matter, is willing to take these cuts seriously. B, Musk is growing seemingly agitated as he's been tweeting out, basically stating that GOP and the government in general is not taking seriously his cut suggestions. And it seems like the spending is just going to continue. Now, putting what a lot of people are terming one of, if not the smartest man that we have, smartest person in the country that we have, which I think is definitely a statement of exaggeration. However, putting someone who has been known for cutting the bills of the companies that he's worked with or owned in order to make them more profitable, and putting him at the head and then not taking his suggestion, I think is, it's pretty obvious to see that the government is not taking seriously any sort of fiscal responsibility. All right. I think that's pretty obvious. I think it just makes sense. It's unfortunate. But that being said, I think that most people that have been following politics for any amount of time or even in any amount would be able to recognize that the government, well, most politicians are full of shit. They say what they need to say to get elected. They're going to say the things that they absolutely have to win a constituency with. And then they're going to turn their backs and do whatever is going to help them stay in power. And if you are undercutting the wealthy individuals that funded your campaign, if you are undercutting your party, if you are undercutting the administration that you work for, maybe you are leading, that's a good way to get killed, get subverted, have everybody undermine you. And I think that it just doesn't make sense for a giant corporation, which the United States government is, probably the biggest corporation in the entire world, publicly anyway. It doesn't make sense for that organization to cut its spending when it has really no recourse and no nobody to hold it accountable. So I think it was kind of a pie in the sky idea that Doge would actually be able to get anything done. But that being said, I think that points to why our spending numbers are just getting absolutely out of control. Another pretty, I would say, pretty inflammatory part of this legislation has to be the cuts being made to Medicaid. Now, some of the cuts that are being made is that I think they're presumptuous cuts in the fact that they are requiring employment to be tied to your Medicaid recipient, receiving Medicaid. Now, with that being said, another kind of portion of this cuts to entitlements is also the cut to the SNAP program. Now, we've talked about entitlement programs multiple times on this show. I definitely did an entire show about it, so you can go and check that out. It is, I think, terrible waste of our taxpayer dollars to be propping up people that do not pay into the system. I think that's pretty clear. But another thing is, these programs, a lot of them go to either disabled individuals, they go to single mothers, they go to people who really need the assistance in order to get by, whether they are holding up a family on a meager income, whether they are, again, disabled and cannot make that high of an income, whatever the case may be. A lot of these programs are set up for individuals that cannot afford life otherwise. And cutting these programs is a quick way to make some enemies. Now, one of the reasons I think that we're not going to see any shift realistically in income taxes in general is that one issue that hasn't been touched, and Andrew and I talked about this off camera, one issue that hasn't been touched and will not be touched, I don't think, ever in our lifetimes, which is a sad state of affairs, I would say, because it is a failing system, is the issue of Social Security. Now, why is it so sad? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Number one, it limits the amount of money, as any tax does, but it limits the amount of money that can directly be paid to you as an employee by an employer. Why does it do that? Not only do you have to pay, I believe it's 6.5%. I could be off on the figure, it could be 7%. I believe it's 6.5%. Not only do you have to pay 6.5% on your wage, on the back end, your employee also has to pay 6.5% that you don't see on your paycheck. What that essentially means is somewhere in the ballpark of 13% of your wage automatically cannot be paid directly to you because it's going to the government in order to fund older people and disabled individuals that need to take money out of Social Security. Social Security was started, again, as we all know, it was started quite some time ago. If I'm not mistaken, it was started under FDR, and it was started with the idea in mind that the United States has the obligation to make sure that its elder citizens have an ability to make money past their retirement. Now, what I think a better way of doing that would be incentivizing retirement plans and maybe mandating retirement plans for companies. It would actually be less costly than a Social Security program like we have it. What it would also do would incentivize investment into our economy rather than what we have now, which I think is somewhat of a Ponzi scheme. The reason that I say that is because we are promising people payments that have not been funded yet. And you are continuing to take money from younger generations in order to fund older generations who are taking these benefits out at this point. Now, another issue with Social Security is that it is a double tax. Now, not the double tax in the way that I already explained, although that could be, I think you can make an argument that that is a double tax as well. But you also get taxed on taking the money out when you do retire. You are getting taxed on this money twice. This is money that comes out of your paycheck, and then you are getting taxed again when you go to utilize this money. That's a major problem when you're talking about the amount of taxes that we pay as Americans. Now, obviously, you can come up with a whole list of different ways that our money is double, triple, quadruple taxed on the same dollar. And I totally agree. But this prime example is an example of, I think, unjustly and immorally taking away from someone's income and getting more money away from them when they go to utilize this quote unquote benefit. I think without cuts to Social Security, without taking seriously the issue that is arising, which is the fact that cost of living adjustments to older people's Social Security takings, if they are to rise to any sort of level in order to meet standard of living, they are going to have to essentially keep pace with inflation. And a major problem in a piece that I would love to do for the Substack, and it'll be coming up probably in a couple months here because I still got some work to do. But a major piece I want to do is the cost of living nowadays. And with the cost of living rising to what it is and having to make again these adjustments to Social Security, one major issue is the fact that wages have not gone up proportionate to the amount of inflation that we've experienced as Americans. Not ever, but especially over the past 40, 50 years. And if you look at the amount of time that Social Security has been in place, going back to the 30s and 40s, we've gone through multiple generations at this point who are now reaping the benefits with, again, cost of living increases that they themselves did not pay that amount of money in. And as we all know, Social Security money is not invested. It is not put into the market to grow. It is immediately shelled out to the recipients that are pulling the money out of their accounts in retirement. It's a major problem. Now, I do want to talk about one last issue that I think a lot of people are quite upset about, and I would say somewhat reasonably so. A lot of people are upset about the targeting of universities. Now, what is an endowment? Endowment, as I understand it, and this is not going to be perfect, but an endowment is essentially a savings account that is in place for universities. Now, this savings account, this money can be invested. It is managed by people in the university. Could be people that have already graduated. It could be the economists that are working for the university, a combination of all of this, probably more. Again, I don't think I'm understanding this 100%, but as I understand it, they're able to invest this money and they get a substantially less tax rate than any of us do investing our money. The excise tax rate started at 1.4%. Now, at the highest level, and this is still going to be a progressive program, which you would kind of hope in a way, but it's going to be a progressive program, much like our income tax. At the highest rate, a place like Harvard is going to see a 21% corporate rate. And could you say that that's a good thing? In some ways, I would say yes. In many ways, I would say not really. And one of the biggest reasons is that if you look at the tuition rates already for these universities, they are through the roof. I mean, I see some universities charging upwards of $100,000 a year now. That's a major problem when you're talking about how do you keep these schools funded? How are they able to give out financial aid? Well, a lot of the financial aid, a lot of payments for programs, payments for research comes out of these endowment funds. And if you're going to be taxing these endowment funds at a 21% rate, that is, well, you could do the math. That is a whole 18.5% that was not getting taxed previously is now being taxed. And that's kind of correct. 19.5, by the way, 19.5%. That did not exist. And now, if this bill is to pass through the Senate, signed into law by President Trump, we are going to see, in my opinion, you are going to see tuition rates, especially at these high-end colleges that have these massive endowments, you're going to see tuitions go through the roof. It's already bad enough. And I think that this could be very detrimental to just the future of our education system. Now, not to linger on this bill too much longer, but just so that you guys have at least somewhat of an understanding. And I encourage you all to go and research it. It's not like I read this 1,200-page bill. I'm not going to get crazy. I read the news articles as best I can. I got a decent amount of knowledge. Another thing that kind of stuck out to me was that there is going to be, number one, an increase in the standard deduction, which is, I think, warranted given, again, the increases in cost of living and the way that inflation has hit us here in America and across the world. I think that that is warranted. We're also seeing a a new write-off, I should say, a new write-off in the tax code that is, if you are paying interest, payment for a car in the United States and the vehicle was manufactured in the United States, you're going to be able to write off your interest. I think that's an interesting caveat. It's definitely promoting the purchasing and the manufacturing of vehicles in the United States. So I wonder if that actually impacts sales, impacts people buying vehicles and financing them. I'm curious about that. I think, again, it's going to have to get signed into law, and I can almost guarantee you that this bill is going to be passed through the Senate and the House a couple of times here before it actually gets signed into law. But this bill gets passed, it's going to be one thing that I definitely want to pay attention to. Moving on into something that I think was a little shocking for myself, and definitely got a few messages from a few different people about this, wondering my thoughts, was that there was a murder of two Israeli diplomats right outside of the embassy in Washington, D.C. Now, it was May 21st, so just a couple days ago here. Uh, going to butcher this name, so fair warning. Yaron Lashinsky and Sarah Lynn Milburn, both murdered outside of the embassy. And actually, they were murdered right outside of the museum. There was the Capitol Jewish Museum. There was an event being held for diplomats, for anybody, I assume, Jewish that wanted to come. Maybe not even necessarily Jewish, but anybody who was interested in the Jewish heritage. They were invited to come. They were shot right outside. The suspect's name is, I lost it here somewhere. It's something Rodriguez. Elias Rodriguez, that's right. So Elias Rodriguez committed the murder as he's getting murdered. My apologies. As he's getting arrested for the murder, he is seen on video getting dragged into the police station, and he is screaming, "Free, free Palestine." Anyone who has been following this ongoing conflict in Gaza knows that one of the big points that a lot of pro-Palestinian people like to shout out, like to scream, is free Palestine. Now, what are they saying with that? Well, if you have not been following my talks on the conflict, and not only the conflict, but the creation of Israel, the start of Israel as a nation, and how they have been at war in perpetuity essentially since their creation, you may not 100% agree with what I'm about to say here, but that is 100% fine. What I'd like to get forth is that by the term free Palestine, what I guess, and I am not Palestinian, I am not Muslim, I'm not trying to claim that I understand 100% what they're saying, but if I had to guess, what they are saying with that is that Palestine, and particularly Gaza in this case, is an occupied land by the state of Israel, and that they would like to free it, and especially pushing towards a two-state solution. If not, then a one-state solution in favor of Palestine over Israel. Now, you very much may disagree with that, and that is okay. I think you are allowed to disagree with that. My biggest point in bringing up this issue is, number one, I had somebody reach out to me, definitely not going to name you, but you definitely know who you are, asking if they are a bad person for not feeling bad about what happened. And I would just say, if you are in that group of people that thinks that these two diplomats deserved to be killed for the actions of the Israeli government, I would say that you are in the wrong. And I'm going to caveat that. I believe that it is the same if you felt repulsed by the murder of the United Healthcare CEO back in December, I think it was. If you were repulsed then and you are not repulsed now, then you have different standards based on either the race or the creed or the type of person that gets murdered. And I think that that is wrong. Now, I don't think that you're a bad person. I think that maybe you need to have a value adjustment. However, that being said, my whole point is that murder should be condemned. And if you talk to, I think, any law-abiding gun owner, which this person, Rodriguez, was a legal firearm owner and utilized it for very bad reasons. But if you are a legal gun-carrying American, if you are someone who owns your weapons for self-defense, self-preservation, I would think that somewhere above 95%, I would say somewhere between 95 and 99% of you would agree that the last thing that you ever want to do is to discharge your firearm and aim it to kill another person. I think that most people would agree with that. I think that most people are against the killing of other people, no matter the circumstance. And I think that this is the same. I do not think that because this person may think that they are justified because they have some sort of manifesto, they have some sort of hatred for the state of Israel, although they may think they're justified, I think us as Americans have to be repulsed. Now, moving on from that point, but staying on this story, because I think it's very important. While I am criticizing those who think that this person deserved to be killed or this person did the right thing in killing these people, while I do think that that is the wrong way to think about things, and, you have a right to free speech 100%. I think the best way to combat bad speech is with better speech. I do not think that you should be shut down for saying that if you believe, and there are tons of people online who are very happy that these Israelis got murdered, and I do not think that that is the proper response. However, caveating that with this, I do think that the murder of these two individuals is fishy. Why do I say that? Well, let's just be honest here. In the history of the state of Israel and the operations of Mossad and other intelligence agencies working on Israel's behalf, there have been many examples of assassination attempts, killings of people across the globe, utilizing political speech and Western media in order to coerce a narrative, in order to push a narrative. And I will say this, as a story that I've been following, as I have done many shows in the past, and especially a show I believe maybe a couple of weeks ago, probably 2 weeks ago now, where I highlighted Trump's drastic changes on policy in the Middle East, American sentiment towards Israel is cratering. I do not know if it's at its lowest rate ever, but it's definitely low. It's definitely on its lower stage, its lower amount, probably its lowest amount that it has been in quite some time, probably its lowest amount since October 7th occurred. Now, with that and the amount of covert operations that Israel has taken part of, and I will also mention the amount of false flag attacks that Israel has been linked to. I think most famous of which would be, if you're not going to be super conspiratorial, what has been pretty much proven has been the attack on the USS Liberty. If you are looking back on the history of Israel, to say that there is a possibility of this being a false flag attack, I would say that there is an argument to be made. Do I believe it? To be honest, I would have to see a little evidence, but the only problem with saying that, and I'm well aware of all the problems with what I'm saying and how many people may hate me for this, but to be honest, I think it needs to be said. The only problem with that is you're not going to see evidence, and I would love to see it, but I don't think that you are ever going to see evidence. You look at something like the USS Liberty and how long it took for information to reach the public about how just awfully both the United States government and Israel's government acted in terms of trying to get the United States brought into a war that it had no business being in. And with all of that, took a long time for that information to come out. And even then, even to this day, if you are hearing information on the USS Liberty, you are most likely listening to someone that mainstream media and most major outlets would call a conspiracy theorist. Now, again, caveating all of that and understanding that what I'm saying may be a little bit out there, I do not think that it is outlandish to think that it's possible. I'm not saying that this is the actual truth. It has been alleged by many people other than myself, and I'm just bringing it to the limelight and letting you do with it as you will. But I do think that it's very possible that this was a false flag attack. I do think that it's very possible that the anti-Israeli sentiment in the United States has reached such a low level that Benjamin Netanyahu and his government, probably Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi Netanyahu in particular, is feeling like they need to do something in order to get the Americans back on their side, in order to get the Americans supporting Israel again, especially monetarily. Now, do I think they could have used an attack like this? Absolutely. Do I think that it could have been something else or strictly news related and not included murders? Yeah, 100%. They probably have been attempting that. And that being said, I do think that you need to, while condemning the person that pulled the trigger, and he is absolutely a murderer and a terrible human being and went to lengths that no American should ever go in order to change policy. With all of that being said, I do think that it is very, very possible that Israel tried to use an individual. Again, it was an individual. He was actually based out of Chicago. The name suggests that he is from Latin American origin. Everything kind of lines up. It kind of lines up in order to push Americans in an anti-immigration, anti-Palestinian movement kind of way. And I would say just keep your head as level as possible. Read as much as you can, see what comes out, and just be aware that it's very possible that this could be an example of a false flag. Now, moving on from this, and I did not mean to drag you all in the conspiratorial weeds, but I do think that that was important to get out there again. And I'm not giving my personal opinion either way. I think that the person who pulled the trigger is absolutely at fault. They did something abhorrent and they deserve to rot in jail. I believe they're actually facing possibly life in prison or the death sentence, and I think that that is proper. Now, I do think that it's important to continue this narrative of false flags and lying and manipulation because something came out this week that is blowing my mind. I want you to take a look at this video.
I tried everything for my depression. Nothing worked.
Every day felt heavy. I felt trapped.
Then I tried Puppermin.
Our prescription helps your body secrete a special pheromone
that attracts puppies.
I took the pill before bed, and when I woke up, there he was, the love of my life.
The pill does not target depression directly, but we've found that it's really difficult to be depressed when cute dogs show up at your doorstep.
I used to feel so empty, but now I feel joy and mild concern how a pee stain got on the ceiling.
My puppy listens twice as good as my ex-husband and only climbs into the lap of half as many of my friends.
He chewed up my Bible and pooped in my good chair. But I'm happy for the first time in years.
Looks like a rat, barks like a demon. But he saved my life.
I named him Earl. He follows me everywhere and farts in his sleep. Just like my first husband.
Pupramine. For when your therapist says, maybe you should get a dog.
This video was produced entirely by AI. It is fucking scary. I'm sorry to curse, but I'm not. That is fucking scary. That whole video is created by a computer. There's not one human actor. There is not one human that was videotaping. There is not one human director. It is entirely generated by AI, and that is insane. What this AI model is called, it is called VEO3. VEO3. It was released by Google. It is essentially a platform that can generate 4K videos with synchronized audio, and it can also be bought by just about anybody. It revolutionizes the cost of video making, and especially high scale, very large projects. Now, the individual that posted this project, the one that I just showed you, posted this quote unquote ad, this fake ad, and said that it cost him about $500. And you should take a look at that and realize how crazy that is. Think about the amount of money that goes into production of any sort of medication ad, any ad at all, the thousands and thousands of dollars you need to invest in paying actors, paying video editors, paying cinematographers, directors, getting these ads paid for and put into the media. Again, thousands and thousands, if not hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars wasted that could be paid for. And this video allegedly cost $500. As I was reading through a few comments, the poster of the video assumed that you could make a full-length movie for somewhere around the cost of $10,000. You look at these massive movie budgets, something like hundreds of millions of dollars for movie budgets nowadays, and to be able to revolutionize the space with an AI is crazy. And I think that there are some major issues that come along with this. What could it be good for? Well, I think it could allow small creators to have access to much higher quality content. That for sure is true. I think it allows people to tell stories that maybe they are unable to or unwilling to approach with their own voice, their own face. Absolutely true. But I think a lot of it comes down to the negatives. There are a lot of deep fakes, as I think we're all aware. Deep fakes going around, and anybody who does not know a deep fake would be someone essentially taking, for example, a fake video of Donald Trump, and he is just spewing Nazi propaganda straight out of Hitler's playbook. And, it's not like the video I just mentioned isn't available all over online. Tons of people have made these types of videos or said the same stuff about Elon Musk and put fake videos of fake words put together for him. But this app in particular, this VEO3, is doing it on a level that I don't think has been seen before. It is a text to video AI generator. And another video that I saw was basically a whole bunch of, on YouTube, I don't know how many of you people are familiar with the gaming environment, what they do, but a lot of what creators do online is Let's Play series. Basically they'll play a video game and they'll put their face in there and they'll play the video game alongside showing their face and their commentary. And there is deep fakes. There is AI generated versions of Let's Play series that are just getting generated and placed all over YouTube. There's also videos of, I'm sure tons of, if not all of you, have seen the videos of the people going on the street and interviewing people. There is versions of this totally AI generated now out of VEO3 that is being created. And again, no actors are real. None of the questions are real. None of the answers are real. And it is just fully made up. And it's hard to tell. Now, I think if you pay attention to the very, very minute details, you can recognize. But I think what the whole point in all of this, what I'm trying to say is that unless you are trying to scrutinize it for being AI, you're not going to be able to tell. And if you can't tell whether a video is real or not, I think we're running into a danger of not being able to tell who we are dealing with, especially if you talk about in the political sense, you're talking about anybody who has a public presence. If any video can be AI generated and can look damn close to real, it's going to be hard to know who you are actually following. And I think it poses a major threat to the intellectual property of a lot of people. Not to say that I am famous enough for this to happen to me, at least not yet, but it's not inconceivable that with all the amount of content that I have put out onto the internet thus far, especially for this podcast, that I may be created into an AI individual very quickly and made to say some things that I do not support. That is a little bit scary. Not even a little bit. That is very scary. This has been a thought on my mind for quite some time. To my knowledge, before this point, there has not been an AI that has been able to match what a real quality and what real person would be able to put together. And I think that this platform actually breaks it breaks that line. It breaks that. There is a theory that I cannot come up with a name with right now at this moment, but essentially it passes, what is it, the Turing test. It passes the Turing test. It is, in my opinion, maybe not fully, but in most regards, indistinguishable from real content. And that is very scary, and it is very dangerous, actually. Now, what does this mean? Well, I think all of us need to be, if you are a creator of any way, or you make videos, or you're putting out advertisements, I think that is imperative on you to stamp your videos as no AI used, no AI generated content, because I think that will start to distinguish you. There are estimates now that by the end of 2027 or something like that, most of, if not like above 90% of content that's put out on YouTube is going to be AI generated content. I think it's going to be an important, first of all, piece of legislation that's going to have to come out saying that if your video is AI generated, you need to click that box or it is illegal. And second, as a follow-up to that, I think that it is going to become a commodity for you to be able to create a real video, for you to be able to create genuine quality content without the use of AI. I think it's going to be very important. So I don't know how you guys feel about this. This thing is scary as hell. And I would love for you guys to let me know in the comments how you feel about all this, because again, you're talking about deep fakes, you're talking about false flag operations, you're talking about all this crap, and everything kind of links together in this whole big slop of shit that can't even tell what is what anymore. It is scary. Moving on to the last thing that I wanted to talk about here today, last story anyway, is something that I found fascinating. I don't know if any of you guys ever listened to him, but for a while, I don't want to say I was religious in listening to every show, but every now and then I would tune into the Bongino Report. I believe that was the name of the show. Dan Bongino. He was a former Secret Service, I believe, if not a CIA, FBI guy. I think he was former Secret Service. And what his show was all about was, first of all, very political, talking a lot about very pro-Trump narratives. And again, this is probably kind of the reason that I couldn't listen to him all the time. But there was a lot of stuff that I wanted to listen to when Trump had his assassination attempt on him. I wanted to get his take, to see how he felt about it. And going back in the years, there were many instances in regards to Jeffrey Epstein where Dan Bongino himself was coming out to say that it was obvious to him that the Epstein suicide was not a suicide, that it was a murder, that there were too many inconsistencies, whether you talk about the cameras failing, the guards falling asleep, the fact that he got put on suicide watch already, that he had scars before he got killed, all of these different things coalescing into one day, all of a sudden he's dead and it gets deemed a suicide that day, some issues with the autopsy and all this, that, and the other thing gets wiped under the rug. Now, I just want to play a clip for you. Understanding that Dan Bongino was that, I happen to agree with that narrative. There's too many inconsistencies. There's too many coincidences with the Epstein suicide for it really to make sense. I want you to listen to this clip.
Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. People don't believe it.
Well, I mean, listen, they have a right to their opinion, but as someone who has worked as a public defender, as a prosecutor, who's been in that prison system, who's been in the Metropolitan Detention Center, who's been in segregated housing, you know a suicide when you see one, and that's what that was.
He killed himself. You want me to? I've seen the whole file.
he killed himself.
So I hope that you didn't only listen to that clip, but if you are watching, you were able to get a look at, and that was Kash Patel and Dan Bongino. And I hope that you were able to get a look at how, not necessarily Kash, because I think he has the same strange looking, to be fair, but the same demeanor every time he speaks. Dan Bongino did not look comfortable in that video. He did not look like he really meant what he was saying or really felt it down deep to his core. It seemed like he was, so to speak, had a gun to his head, that was a hostage video. And that was a crazy watch to me, to see that flip, see that type of person. Now, I don't know how much we've talked about Epstein on this show. I think that there's been multiple times where I brought him up, especially when we did the whole thing about the pedophiles and just how disgusting that whole way of life is. But I think that it is important, if you are unaware, to go and do your own research on Epstein. I know a lot of people say that, but to be honest, I don't think I have all the answers. One thing that I think is very important to recognize is that there's a lot of evidence. There's a lot of Israel talk in this show, and I apologize for that, but that's kind of just the way that it is today. There's a lot of evidence to point at Jeffrey Epstein being an asset of Israel, being an agent of Mossad, and if not, having a lot of ties to people who did. Now, this could be either Ari Ben Menashe, who claims that he was a honey trapper, or whether you're listening to the amount of people that say he had ties to Mahmoud Barak, the former prime minister of Israel, or whether you're talking about his mistress, Ghislaine Maxwell, and her father, who has been claimed by many to have been a Mossad agent. There's a lot of ties to Israel, and there's a lot of really disgusting things behind Epstein and the amount that he got a soft hand. If you remember back when he was arrested, I want to say in like 2008, something in Florida, and he was arrested and he could not be prosecuted to the highest degree because the prosecutor was quoted as saying, and I'm not giving a direct quote here, it's a paraphrase, he was quoted as saying something along the lines of, I could not prosecute because I was told he is intelligence. What intelligence that was, nobody was ever able to come up with, and it is a scary thing to think about, but Jeffrey Epstein very well may have been an asset of an intelligence agency, and again, I think there's a decent amount of speculative proof, at least, that he was belonging to an Israeli organization. Now, the amount that he has ties, again, to like gun runners out of Israel, that he has ties to the former prime minister of Israel, the ties that he has to Ghislaine Maxwell and her father especially. It is very, very odd coincidences, to say the least. Now, when you're thinking about whether he killed himself or not, well, there's a lot of powerful people, allegedly, because these fucking files are not getting released, but there's a lot of people that allegedly are very high up, someone like President Trump himself, Alan Dershowitz, the famous lawyer, what is it, Prince Andrew. There is tons of people who are implicated. Bill Gates, I think, even Stephen Hawking. The list is immense of super famous people that are implicated in Jeffrey Epstein's operation. I believe a lot of those, if not all of those names that I just mentioned, are mentioned on the flight logs. And it is truly insane to think that someone who had this much dirt on, allegedly this much dirt, because again, these files are not coming out, but someone who had this much dirt on this many powerful people in the world, that he was allowed to live on, that he was going to be allowed to be prosecuted. Like, you have to imagine that if that person was allowed to go to trial, that he would start spilling beans in order to save his own ass. This guy was extremely wealthy. This guy was handed a lot of gifts, especially by his former employer. For the life of me, I'm not going to remember the full name. I believe it was like Leslie Wexler, something like that, the owner of like Victoria's Secret, multiple other companies that are centered around females and having access to young females, of course. And this man signed his life away, gave him that massive mansion in New York as a gift, signed away his power of attorney to Jeffrey Epstein. There are so many weird things that have come up with Jeffrey Epstein. And just if you start digging just enough, it is really preposterous to try to think of the amount of people that it implicates. And basically, my whole point in bringing all this up is it did not look like Dan Bongino was telling the truth. It did not look like that was somebody who felt comfortable being in that video, did not feel like he was comfortable answering that question. And I think that kind of puts the puts the onus on us Americans to make sure that we're all doing our research, make sure that we're all having as much information as publicly available, because it's impossible to have all these access to these files, because clearly our government doesn't want us to be, even though Trump, I'm pretty sure, made this part of his running of his campaign. It is scary, man. It is a scary world to live in. And just to kind of wrap up, because I know I've been on a monologue here for quite some time on this show. It's probably one of the longer solo episodes I've done in quite some time. But let me just wrap this up. We had a massive spending bill that got unleashed on us. It has not been passed by both houses, but it has been passed by the Congress, the House of Representatives. It is heading to the Senate now. You have to imagine that if this bill gets passed by the Senate, it's going to get signed into the law by the president, given that he pushed this bill. And he is, of course, the creator of the name. I don't know any other human being that would create the name One Big Beautiful Bill Act. That's got to be Trump. But be on the lookout for that. There's quite a few changes that would come to, I think, everybody's lives, whether that's tax on tips and overtime, cut to Medicaid and the SNAP program, cut to the endowment programs at colleges. There's a lot of implications on all of our daily lives, and I think that it's important that you at least understand the keynotes. Again, I'm not claiming that I have read that whole thing, but it is one hell of a bill. I think we got to stop these massive fucking bills, man, and it is getting tiring to see that some congressman is posting that, I got 1,200 pages to read and I got about 12 hours to do it, or else I'm not voting on information that I know of. Another thing that we talked about today, which I think is pretty important, is the murder of the 2 Israeli diplomats in Washington, D.C., with the low approval rating of the American public and Israel. I think that is proper to view that murder with some skepticism. And not that it didn't happen, because it clearly happened. Not that the person who pulled the trigger doesn't deserve all the blame, because he does. But I do think that there may have been some unclean parts of that murder, and it would be, I think, important for us as the American people to push for the truth to come out, to make sure that there wasn't anything devious as a part of it, other than the fact that someone pulled the trigger and murdered 2, in my opinion, innocent individuals. I think that it is very odd that it was someone of Latin American descent that, as he's getting arrested, he's screaming out "Free, free Palestine" instead of saying anything or nothing, anything else, in order to maybe make the claim that he was innocent, or saying nothing and retaining his right to silence. Instead, he says the one thing that's probably going to get him put in jail. If you didn't catch it, I didn't get to talk about this in the segment, but I think it's pretty important to bring up. Netanyahu did come out and say that Free Palestine is the new Hail Hitler. And if you believe that, I'm sorry, but you are probably the biggest sucker. And I do think that that plays a big part in why I suggested that we need to be on the lookout for something like a false flag. And maybe this was a false flag. Maybe this was an example. Because who the hell says something like that, man? Someone saying "Free Palestine," that is the lead phrase of protests in the United States. And you're going to say that that's Hail Hitler? Come on, let's be fucking realistic here. And I was very disgusted in hearing that out of BB. Not that there's a lot of things I'm not disgusted these days that are coming out of his mouth. Furthermore, we talked about the fake video software, so I hope that you guys are on the lookout for some AI creative videos. And last but not least, we talked about Dan Bongino flipping the script. Talk about being a full 180. That guy looked like he had a gun to his head that may have been 15 feet away from the camera. And that was really, really weird, dude. I want to hear all your opinions. Let me know in the comments what you thought of the video. I hope you guys all have a very, very blessed and enjoyable Memorial Day weekend. We have a day off of work. Everybody who's working for somebody, you probably got a day off today. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the show. Get into me in the comments like this, and definitely subscribe to get more We The Patriots action. Hit that bell for some notifications. Let you know when all the new shows drop, and be on the lookout. I actually have a decent amount of research. I'm not going to say all of it, but a decent amount of research for the extra content that I'm going to be putting out on 9/11 for the Substack. I'm thinking it's going to be a multi-part series, so part 1 should be coming out, we'll say, in 2 to 3 weeks, so be on the lookout for that. With no further ado, I'm going to sign out. Hope you guys have a great week. Peace out.
I want to be something, not nothing. Trapped inside my dream and I'm running away from these demons. But the feeling's so good, I'ma keep dreaming.